They sat me in the back row at my own daughter's wedding. "Just a working woman," his mother said, like that explained everything. My smile didn't crack. My hands didn't tremble. I clapped with the rest of them, even as my heart sank behind centerpieces and second glances. But as I watched my daughter walk down the aisle, radiant and unaware, I made a quiet promise. They may have put me in the back today, but this is the last time I'll ever sit there. It was the day of my daughter's wedding, a day I had waited for with a mix of joy and dread. The church was adorned in delicate white flowers, and the air was filled with the sound of wedding bells, laughter, and well wishes. My daughter Emily looked radiant in her wedding gown. She was beautiful, graceful, and full of love for the man she was about to marry. But as much as I wanted to savor this moment, I could feel the tension rising within me, a storm I couldn't shake. I had spent years working to provide for Emily, to make sure she had the best life possible. My career wasn't just a job, it was my identity. I had worked hard to climb the ladder, to prove myself in a world that often viewed women like me as just a working woman. I had always believed that my role as a mother and a professional could coexist, that I could be proud of both. But today, on this special day, everything seemed to be coming apart at the seams. As I arrived at the venue, I was greeted by the cheerful chatter of relatives and friends. They were all so excited to celebrate the beginning of a new chapter in Emily's life, but beneath the surface, I could sense something was off. My in-laws, however, were acting a bit differently. They avoided my gaze, exchanged knowing looks, and whispered among themselves when I walked into the room. At first, I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to pre-wedding nerves, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The moment the seating arrangements were announced, it became painfully clear. My husband, Mark, who had always been caught in the middle of our family dynamics, simply nodded as the seating was assigned. "Your seat is in the back by the other women," his mother Sheila said in her clipped, disapproving voice. My heart dropped. I knew exactly what she meant by the other women, the stay-at-home mothers, the ones who didn't have careers, the ones who didn't work long hours, the ones who weren't just working women like me. It stung. It stung more than I had ever anticipated. I had spent years trying to balance my career with my family, fighting against societal expectations and gender stereotypes. But today, on the day of my daughter's wedding, it felt as if all my accomplishments had been reduced to nothing. As I walked to my assigned seat at the back of the room, a cold lump formed in my throat. I glanced over at Emily, her face beaming with happiness, oblivious to the hurt I was carrying with me. There, in the back of the room, behind all the other mothers and family members I sat, my chair felt smaller than it ever had before, as though the weight of my very being was being diminished in front of me. I sat there, quiet, as the ceremony began, trying to swallow the bitter taste of being judged for who I was. I was just a working woman, after all. As the wedding ceremony unfolded in front of me, I felt the distance between myself and my family grow with every passing minute. The sounds of vows being exchanged, the clink of glasses, and the soft laughter of relatives in the front row seemed like a distant echo in my ears. I sat there, watching my daughter, Emily, marry the love of her life, but I couldn't shake the feeling of exclusion, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. I tried to smile, to force myself to enjoy the moment, but the weight of the situation was too heavy. I looked around the room at the women who had always been by my side, my sister-in-law, Nancy, and a few others who, like me, had spent years navigating the challenges of balancing family and career. But unlike me, they didn't seem to bear the invisible mark of judgment that hung over my shoulders. They didn't sit in the back of the room as I did, reduced to a shadow of what I had worked so hard to build. The ceremony continued, but my thoughts wandered to the years of sacrifice, to the sleepless nights spent working late to provide for Emily, to the moments I missed because of my demanding job. It was a choice I made willingly, but somehow today, in this place, that choice seemed to be invalidated. That moment my daughter walked down the aisle, I saw her glowing with joy, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to feel pride. But it was quickly followed by that same gnawing feeling of rejection. After the vows, As the guests mingled and shared their congratulations, the cold silence in the back of the room grew louder. The in-laws, who had made their feelings about my career clear, over the years were now free to continue their passive-aggressive remarks. Sheila, my mother-in-law, was deep in conversation with the other women. Every so often she would glance over at me with a look that seemed to pierce through me. I caught her eye at one point and forced a smile. "It's a beautiful wedding," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She nodded, but her smile was thin, almost condescending. "Yes, it is. But of course you wouldn't know the first thing about the effort it takes to plan a wedding, would you? You were too busy working." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. It was as if every word she spoke was meant to belittle me, to remind me of my place. The way she said working felt like a subtle jab, as if being a professional woman was, somehow, less valuable than being a traditional housewife. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped myself. What was the point? No matter what I said, no matter how I tried to justify my choices, it wouldn't change their view of me. I was just the working woman, someone who didn't belong in their world of traditional roles and expectations. So, I bit my tongue and looked away, turning my attention back to Emily, whose smile never wavered, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the background. But it was hard to ignore the feeling that I was invisible. The air around me felt thick with judgment, with assumptions about who I was and what my place in this family should be. It was as though everything I'd accomplished in my career, everything I had done for Emily, meant nothing compared to the fact that I was, in their eyes, simply a working woman. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help but feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. I had worked so hard, sacrificed so much for this family, and yet, here I was, relegated to the back, barely acknowledged. But more than the hurt, there was a growing fire within me, a desire to be seen, to be heard. I had been invisible for too long, and somewhere deep inside, I knew this day, this moment, was just the beginning of something bigger. The reception was a blur of dancing, laughter, and clinking glasses. But none of it reached me. I felt like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, a guest in a world that wasn't meant for me. I kept to the shadows, lingering at the edges of the crowd, watching as Emily and her new husband shared their first dance. I wanted to be happy, to revel in the joy of the occasion, but the sting of being pushed aside, of being deemed unworthy, clouded every moment. It wasn't until after dinner that I noticed the conversation had shifted. The men were gathered at one table, discussing business or sports as usual, while the women sat at another. I overheard snippets of their conversation, nothing overt, but enough to make me feel small. Sheila, as always, was leading the conversation, her voice carrying above the rest. "I still don't understand why she has to work," Sheila said, her words dripping with disdain. "It's not like she has to. Why not just stay home like the rest of us? There's no need for her to be working so much, especially when her daughter needs her." I felt my face flush with anger. Every word was an accusation, a reminder that I wasn't enough because I chose to work. My professional life, my career, my identity, none of it mattered. To them, I was just a woman who had abandoned her place. In the home, a woman who wasn't fulfilling her duty as a mother the right way. It took everything I had to stay composed. I wanted to storm over to that table and tell them exactly what I thought of their narrow-minded views. I wanted to scream that I worked so Emily could have the life she deserved, that my sacrifices were for her, that I had always been there for her in every way that mattered. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that would only make things worse. The in-laws would see me as the troublemaker, the working woman who just didn't get it. Instead, I stayed where I was, silent, but seething. But then, as if fate had decided to make this even more unbearable, Mark came over. He must have seen me sitting alone, away from the rest of the family. He smiled, but it was forced, strained. "Hey, honey," he said, sitting down beside me. "You okay?" I nodded, my hands gripping my glass a little too tightly. "I'm fine." He paused, glancing over at the group. "You know how Sheila can be. She's just old-fashioned. Don't let it bother you." I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger, the frustration, It had been building up for hours, and now it all came rushing out. Old-fashioned? I repeated, my voice low but steady. No, Mark, it's not just that. It's the way they treat me. The way they make me feel like I'm less than them because I work. They look at me like I don't belong. Here, like I'm some kind of outsider, just because I have a career. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. You know it's not like that. They don't understand. They've always been like this. No, I said, cutting him off. It's not about understanding. It's about judgment. They judge me for everything. My career, my choices, my life. And I'm tired of it, Mark. I'm tired of pretending like it doesn't bother me. He didn't respond at first. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the weight of the situation sinking in. I'll talk to them, he said finally. I'll make sure they know how you're feeling. But his words felt hollow, empty. I had heard that promise before. Over the years, Mark had always promised to handle things, to smooth things over with his family. But nothing ever changed. The same judgment, the same condescension, the same silencing of my worth. I looked at him, a tight smile forming on my lips. Don't bother. They won't listen to you. They've made up their minds about me, and nothing you say will change that. I'm just a working woman, after all. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and I could see the flicker of guilt pass across his face. But there was nothing he could do. His family was entrenched in their beliefs, and I was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. As I sat there, the wedding reception continuing around me, I realized something. I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need their approval, to know my worth. I had fought too hard for too long to let them reduce me to their narrow view of who I was. But that didn't mean I was going to let it slide. I wasn't going to sit quietly in the back anymore, allowing them to push me aside. Not this time. The night wore on, but the weight of the evening's events hung heavy over me. The reception was supposed to be a celebration, a joyous occasion, but all I could think about was the humiliation, the sting of being treated as lesser. I watched Emily as she danced with her new husband, her face aglow with happiness. She was living the dream, surrounded by family, friends, and all the love in the world. I wanted to be happy for her truly, but it was hard to ignore the fact that, at that moment, I felt invisible. After a while, I couldn't sit still any longer. The back of the room was suffocating, and the murmurs of the women behind me were only adding to my frustration. They were laughing, talking about their children, about how much easier it was to raise a family without the distraction of a career. I could feel their eyes on me as if they were waiting for me to react, for me to defend my choices. But no one ever asked me why I worked, why I did what I did. They just assumed it was out of selfishness, out of some misplaced ambition. I needed air. I needed to clear my head before I lost my composure entirely. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside, walking into the cool evening air. The garden outside the venue was quiet, the sound of the wedding celebration muted behind me. I walked down the gravel path, my mind racing. Why did it have to be like this? Why couldn't they just see me for who I truly was, for the sacrifices I had made for the woman I had become? Instead, they saw a career woman, someone who didn't fit into their little box of what a real mother should be. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Mark walking toward me, a troubled expression on his face. Hey, he said gently, coming to stand beside me. I can see you're upset. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I just stared out at the garden, my arms crossed, tightly across my chest. The cool air felt like a balm, but it didn't soothe the anger boiling inside me. I'm fine, I said through clenched teeth, trying to sound calm. Just needed some space. Mark didn't press me. He stood beside me, in silence for a moment, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like he was trying to figure out how to fix this, how to make things right. But there was nothing he could do. Not anymore. You know, he began, breaking the silence. They don't really understand what you've done, all that you've sacrificed. They see you as I don't know, someone who chose work over family. I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. Don't you dare say that to me, Mark. I didn't choose work over family. I chose to work because I wanted to provide for Emily. I wanted her to have a future. I wanted her to see that she could be anything she wanted to be, that she didn't have to settle for the role they think is the only one a woman should have. His face softened and he reached out, placing a hand on my arm. I know. I wish they saw that. I wish they could see the woman I see, the mother, the provider, the person who sacrificed so much for our family. I pulled away from him, my frustration building again. But they don't see that, Mark. They never have and they never will. They see me as someone who doesn't belong, someone who doesn't fit their definition of what a woman should be. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of always being the one who's to prove herself, who has to justify her existence to everyone. I'm not going to stand here and pretend like I'm okay with being treated like this. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop him. I don't need your family's approval anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to earn their respect, to prove that I'm enough. But now I see that it doesn't matter. It's never going to matter to them. I paused, my heart pounding in my chest. But it matters to me. I matter. And I'm done letting them treat me like I don't. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Mark stood there, stunned into silence. I could tell he was trying to process everything I had just said, trying to find a way to make it right. But there was no way to fix this. No easy solution. I had to do this on my own. I turned away from him, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let them define me. I wasn't going to let their narrow-minded views control my life anymore. It was time to stand up for myself, to demand respect, not just from them, but from myself as well. The night stretched on, but the feeling of resolve that had settled within me remained unshaken. I walked back inside, my heart still racing, but my mind clearer than it had been all evening. The decision had been made. I wouldn't let this humiliation slide. I would confront it, head on, and I would do it for myself, because no one else would. I made my way back to the reception hall where Emily was now mingling with guests, her excitement palpable. She didn't see the hurt in my eyes, she didn't know what I had just endured. But she deserved to know. She deserved to hear the truth, to understand why I couldn't stay silent any longer. I searched the room for her, my gaze landing on her across the dance floor. She was laughing, surrounded by friends and family, a vision of happiness. I hesitated for a moment, uncertain how to bring up the tension I had just experienced, but I couldn't let it fester. I had to speak up. I walked over to her, my footsteps heavy despite my resolve. When she saw me approach, her face lit up, and for a moment, all the weight of the evening felt lighter. My daughter, the woman I had raised and loved so deeply, was right there in front of me. "Mom, there you are," she said with a bright smile, reaching out to hug me. "How's everything going? Are you enjoying yourself?" I returned her embrace, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. She deserved the truth. "I need to talk to you, Emily," I said, pulling back slightly to look her in the eyes. "In private?" Her smile faltered, a look of concern crossing her face. "What's wrong, Mom?" I paused, trying to steady myself. "I need you to understand something that's been bothering me tonight." She nodded, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "Of course, let's go sit down." We moved to a quiet corner, away from the crowd, and sat down together. I looked at her for a long moment, trying to find the right words. I had always been the strong one, the one who could handle everything. But tonight I felt like I was unraveling, and I needed her to see me, to understand what I was going through. "Emily," I began, my voice quiet but firm, "I need you to know what happened tonight. I need you to understand why I'm upset." She looked at me puzzled, her brows furrowing in concern. "What happened, Mom? Did someone say something to you?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. Your grandmother's side of the family, your aunts, uncles. Your grandmother, well, they made me feel like I didn't belong here tonight. They treated me like I was some outsider, like I was beneath them, all because I'm a working woman. Emily blinked, her face flushing with confusion. What do you mean? They wouldn't do that to you, right? I shook my head. They did, sweetheart. They asked me to sit at the back, far away from everyone else just because I have a career. They see me as less than them, less than a proper mother because I work. They think that I don't care about you or about this family, that I've somehow failed because I'm not a stay-at-home mom like they expect. Her expression softened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. I continued, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to rise to the surface. I've spent my whole life working hard, providing for you, giving you everything I could. And yet, to them, it's never been enough. I've been treated like a second-class citizen, all because of the choices I made. Emily was silent for a moment, her eyes wide with surprise. I had no idea, Mom. I mean, I know they're old-fashioned, but I didn't think they would actually treat you like that, especially not at my wedding. I shook my head. It's not just this wedding, Emily. It's been years. But tonight, it finally hit me. I'm done pretending like it doesn't hurt. I'm done letting them make me feel small, like I don't matter. I matter. And I'm going to stand up for myself. She reached out, taking my hand in hers, her fingers warm and gentle. You've always been my role model, Mom. You've always taught me to be strong and to never let anyone define me. You deserve respect. And if they can't see that, then they're the ones who need to change, not you. Her words were like a balm to my wounded soul. For the first time that night, I felt like someone truly understood me. She understood what I had fought for, the battles I had fought in silence. But now I knew I wasn't fighting alone. I'm sorry you had to go through this, Mom, Emily continued, her voice steady and full of conviction. But I'm proud of you. You've always done what was right for us, for me, and that's what matters. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to be here. I squeezed her hand, a surge of emotion flooding through me. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about the in-laws or the judgment I had faced for years. It was about my own sense of self-worth, my belief in who I was and what I had accomplished. And Emily, my beautiful daughter, had reminded me of that. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing me, for understanding. I don't need anyone else's approval, not anymore. Emily smiled, her eyes shining with love. You never needed it, Mom. You never have. And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. After my conversation with Emily, I felt a shift inside me. The weight that had been crushing my chest since the start of the evening had lightened, but the fire inside me was far from extinguished. I was no longer willing to stay quiet, to sit in the back while my worth was questioned. I was a mother, a professional, a woman who had spent years building a life for herself and her family. And tonight, I would make sure that everyone, especially my in-laws, knew that. The next few hours were a blur of clinking glasses, laughter, and strained smiles. But now I moved through the reception with a new purpose. No longer did I feel like a shadow in the room. I stood taller, walked more confidently, and every time I caught someone's eye, I made sure they saw me, really saw me. I wasn't going to hide in the corner anymore. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like I was invisible. Not tonight. Not ever again. It wasn't until later, in the evening, after the speeches and toasts had been made, that I saw Sheila once again. She was standing near the center of the room, chatting with a few of the other women. When our Reyes met, her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a look of indifference. I knew what was coming. She was going to offer some sort of backhanded remark, maybe even apologize in her own way, but I wasn't interested in hearing it anymore. I had carried the weight of her judgment for far too long, and now it was time to confront it directly. With a deep breath, I made my way over to her. The closer I got, the more I felt my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. No more hiding, no more pretending. Sheila, I said, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. She turned to me, her expression unreadable, her eyes narrowing. Slightly. Oh, do we? She replied, her tone dripping with cool detachment. I didn't realize there was anything left to discuss. I squared my shoulders, meeting her gaze head-on. There is, actually. You and I both know what's been going on here tonight, and I'm done letting you or anyone else treat me like I'm less than I am. Her lips tightened, and for a moment I thought she might walk away. But instead she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Less than you are? I'm not sure I follow. You know exactly what I mean, I continued, my voice steady but unwavering. You've made it clear over the years how you feel about my career, about the choices I've made. You've treated me like an outsider, like I don't belong in this family because I'm a working woman. And tonight, at my daughter's wedding, I was relegated to the back of the room because of it. I won't stand for that anymore. Sheila's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Regret? But she quickly masked it. I didn't mean to offend you if that's how you took it. I shook my head, refusing to let her minimize what had happened. No, I'm not going to let you downplay this. I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel like I'm not enough. I've worked hard to get where I am. And I've raised Emily, the woman you all love, with the same values. Values that don't diminish me just because I choose to work. For a moment, there was silence. Sheila stood there, her arms still crossed, her lips pressed together tightly. But I could see the shift in her posture. She was no longer looking down on me. There was a flicker of understanding, maybe even respect. I don't know if you fully understand the way we see things, she began slowly. But I'll admit I haven't always made an effort to see your point of view. I've always believed that a woman's place is at home, raising her family. But that doesn't mean I don't respect what you've done or how hard you've worked. I met her eyes. No, Sheila, it's not just about respect. It's about acknowledging that I'm a part of this family too. I've put in the work and I've made sacrifices. And I deserve the same treatment as everyone else, regardless of my job. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she didn't seem quite so condescending. I guess I never really thought about it that way. I'm sorry. The apology was small, but it was enough. I didn't expect her to change overnight, but this was a step in the right direction. The acknowledgement that my place in the family wasn't defined by my career, but by my heart and my efforts, was all I needed to hear. I gave her a small nod. Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. She stood there for a moment longer, as if weighing something in her mind, then finally nodded in return. I'll try to do better. I turned away, my heart lighter than it had been all evening. For the first time that night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had spoken my truth, stood up for myself, and made sure that Sheila understood that I was not going to be dismissed. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The night seemed to shift after my confrontation with Sheila. The tension that had clouded everything earlier began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of clarity. It wasn't just Sheila who needed to hear my side. It wasn't just her I had to convince. I needed to make sure that everyone who had ever doubted me, who had ever questioned my choices, saw me for who I really was. And I was no longer going to hide behind their expectations. As the evening progressed, I continued to move through the crowd, but this time it was different. I wasn't shrinking into the background. I wasn't fading into the periphery. I was present. And I made sure everyone knew it. Around the dessert table, I found myself standing beside Mark's brother, Paul. He was always the quieter own, the one who didn't get involved in the family drama, preferring instead to stay out of the spotlight. He'd always been kind to me, though, offering quiet support when Mark wasn't around to mediate the tensions between me and his family. Paul looked at me, his expression thoughtful. You okay? He asked, his voice soft, but with an underlying concern. I met his gaze, surprised by his approach. I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Just dealing with some things. He nodded, sensing there was more to it. I saw what happened with Sheila, he said, his voice low. I don't agree with the way she treats you, or the way she's treated you over the years, but I want you to know something. And I'm not saying this to make you feel better, but because it's true, I respect you. I respect everything you've done for Emily and for this family. You've always been there, even when they didn't see it. You're one of the hardest working people I know, and they're lucky to have you in this family. I stood there, speechless, for a moment, not knowing how to respond. This was the last thing I had expected. Paul, of all people, offering me this kind of validation. I had never heard him speak so openly about his feelings, let alone about the way his family treated me. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know. Honestly, I've been carrying this weight for so long, and hearing this from you, it's a relief." He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "You deserve it. And I think Emily needs to know how much you've done too. She may not see it now, but someday she'll understand." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "I hope she does." We stood there for a few moments longer, exchanging a few more words, and for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Paul's quiet support was a gift, one that gave me the strength to carry on. His words gave me a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, the in-laws weren't all the same. Maybe there were some in this family who saw me, who valued what I had done. As I rejoined the wedding celebration, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. The night wasn't over yet, but I'd made a mark, and I wasn't going to let it fade. The evening was winding down, and the energy in the room had shifted. The laughter, once nervous and uncertain, had turned into genuine joy. The guests had finally settled into the rhythm of the celebration, and Emily and her new husband, Daniel, were glowing as they moved through the crowd, greeting friends and family. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final thing I needed to do. I had stood up to Sheila. I had spoken my truth. But there was still one person I hadn't yet addressed. Mark. As the night wore on and the dance floor began to fill with guests, I sought him out. He was talking to some of his friends. But when he saw me approaching, his expression softened. I could see the concern still in his eyes, mixed with a hint of guilt. He knew, deep down, that he hadn't always supported me in the way he should have. "Hey," I said quietly, stepping close to him. "Can we talk?" He excused himself from the group and followed me to a quieter corner of the venue. The lights were dim here, casting long shadows across the floor, but I didn't need them to see clearly. This conversation was long overdue. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice tentative. "I know tonight's been hard on you, and I feel like I've let you down. I've never stood up for you like I should have. And I'm sorry for that." I shook my head, refusing to let him take all the blame. "It's not just about you, Mark. It's about this family. It's about how they see me, or how they don't see me. They've treated me like I'm less than, like, I don't belong because of my career, and I've spent so many years trying to prove that I'm enough. But every time I did, they just found a new way to push me down." He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't know it was that bad." "It's not just tonight," I said, my voice softening. "It's been years, Mark. Years of feeling like I'm not good enough because I work. And you've always been caught in the middle trying to keep the peace. But I need you to understand something. I need you to know that I don't need anyone's approval anymore. I don't need to fit into their mold. I'm proud of what I've done, proud of the choices I've made. And if they can't accept that, then that's their problem." He was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Then he reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I've always been proud of you, you know that, right? I'm sorry it took me so long to truly see how much you've sacrificed for this family, for Emily. But I'm here now, and I'm not going to let them keep doing this to you. I'll make sure they understand that you matter. More than they'll ever know." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed his hand. For the first time in years, I felt like Mark truly saw me, truly understood me. And for the first time in a long while, I knew that I wasn't fighting alone. The last few moments of the wedding were bittersweet. The night had turned into something I had never imagined, a moment of transformation, not just for Emily, but for me as well. The emotions I had fought to suppress for so long had finally found their release, and I felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying had been lifted. The guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, the music softening as the last few dances played out. The glow of the chandeliers above seemed warmer now, almost comforting. Emily and Daniel were surrounded by a sea of friends and family, their joy infectious as they basked in the love of the moment. But I wasn't lost in the background anymore. I wasn't a passive participant in my own life. I found myself standing on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against my face. It felt like a quiet reprieve, a space where I could finally breathe. I leaned against the railing, gazing out at the garden below, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly reflect on everything that had happened. The in-laws' judgment, the years of trying to please them, the feeling of being constantly dismissed. All of it had led me to this moment. And while the confrontation with Sheila had been necessary, the real shift had come from within me. I no longer needed their approval. I had always been enough. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Emily walking toward me, her wedding dress flowing behind her like a cloud of white. She had a look of determination on her face, but there was something else there, something deeper. Her smile was warm, but there was an intensity in her eyes that told me she had been thinking about what had transpired that night. "Mom," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for being here for me tonight, for always being there for me no matter what. I know I haven't always understood, but I see it now. I see you." My heart swelled as I took a step toward her. "You've always seen me, Emily. I've just been too busy trying to be everything for everyone else to see myself. But tonight, I realized that I don't have to keep doing that. I don't have to keep proving myself to anyone. I'm enough just the way I am." Emily stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me in a tight hug. "You are," she whispered, her voice steady with conviction. "You're more than enough." We stood there for a moment, the weight of the day finally settling in as we held each other. It was like everything had come full circle. From the painful moments at the beginning of the night to this quiet, powerful acknowledgement of who I was and what I had given to this family. Emily had always been my anchor, my reason for everything. And now, I felt like I was giving her something more. A legacy of strength, of resilience, and of the quiet power of standing up for yourself. The wedding was almost over, but for me, this was a new beginning. A beginning where I no longer hid in the shadows, where I didn't shrink from my accomplishments, where I stood tall and proud of the life I had created, of the woman I had become. As the last song played, Emily and Daniel shared one final dance, their silhouettes bathed in the soft light of the ballroom. I watched them, my heart full, knowing that despite all the challenges I had faced, I had given them the best gift I could, a mother who had taught them the importance of being true to themselves, of never allowing anyone to diminish their worth. And, in that moment, I realized that I didn't need anything from my in-laws, from anyone, to validate my place in this family. I had already claimed it.